Welcome to Undercomplicated, where we, two psychologists with over 40 years of combined experience, share our insights to help undercomplicate important topics. Friendly reminder as we get started that this video is meant for conversational and entertainment purposes only. So please see the information section of this video for additional resources. Dr. Gideon, as we get started, do you want to do an introduction?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Stacy Gedian. I'm a health psychologist and a healthcare consultant, professional coach, and a speaker. And how about you, Dr. Radico?
Julie Radico. I am a psychologist, a coach, author, and a speaker. And I am excited for us to jump into our topic for today because I think it's one that people often sort of conflate. And so, our question for our listeners is, what does it mean to experience trauma with a big T versus trauma with a little t? And Stacey, could you start us off and even kind of like what does that question mean?
I think this is such an important topic, and I'm glad that we're asked to address it. When we think of trauma, we think of big life-altering events, natural disasters, for example. That's very much in the news these days. Accidents, violence, big things that are life-changing and maybe not they may not be repeated. When we think of trauma with a little t or a small t, these are things that may not be as noticeable, but they're chronic and they
Mhm.
build up over time. Um, and one phrase that some people refer to is death by a thousand cuts.
Mm.
So the first 1, 10, 100, 200, maybe you're holding strong. And then after a while, boy, things just start to happen. And I'm wondering if you could touch on how we might notice when we're under those little T's and it's building up over time.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Because as you said, we can experience trauma in so many different forms that I'm mindful working with clients over the years who would say, oh, I don't think I have any trauma because I didn't go to war,
Yeah.
or like my house didn't experience a big flood, or, like, and just this idea of that trauma can compound over time to feel like you did experience,
Mhm.
a life-threatening event, and or it's valid even when it's one small cut, like in our analogy that we're using here. Um, and so, like, checking in with yourself to validate that stressful interaction that might have been traumatic for you. That conversation that was really scary and unexpected, that might have been traumatic for you. Uh, Doing the litmus test of not ignoring your feelings and how you feel about something. And so to add another analogy, I often think about it as like a spidey sense. If
Mm,
you're like, "Ah, my spidey sense, like, like Spider-Man has a spidey sense that kind of tells him when something's wrong. Um, like that feeling of like, ooh, something felt wrong about that. People might say trust your gut or like, but that
mhm.
you just might walk away from an experience going, huh, I feel bad in some type of way. And I can't put my finger on why or how right now. But in those moments, recognizing that that might have been a small, you know,
Mhm.
trauma, like, and I don't say small, like it's like a small cut in our analogy for like the trauma is valid and significant no matter what.
Right.
What might you add to that?
So when I'm working with people, they'll often describe for me, we'll just say a workplace scenario, and they start describing interactions they've had with superiors that again weren't overt bullying, certainly weren't violent, but they were just sort of subcategory of maybe being dismissed, being overly negative, favoritism. I had one client who was describing to me what was going to be a routine meeting with their boss, and the boss comes in just fired up and wasn't yelling and screaming, but was obviously quite angry about a bunch of things that, again, it's a story I won't get into, but the person didn't realize until weeks later when we're talking that that was a traumatic experience.
Mm.
They felt, we explored, how did you feel? I felt unsafe. I felt uncomfortable. I felt like this person might kind of get out of control. This isn't a good way to communicate. And so validating, noticing those things. Other things can be physiological signs and symptoms, not sleeping well, appetite changes. Um, they call them what the Sunday scaries, like that dread of going into
Mm.
work. Again, if we're thinking of that situation, but it can happen in relationships too, where there um, are people. I had someone this morning actually who said that they weren't abused, they were just put down a lot. And so I think helping reflect back to people that what they did experience was traumatic and
Mm.
stressful and had an impact,
Mm.
um, to help them acknowledge that. And like you said, then learn to trust your gut.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm mindful as you say that we're sort of conditioned as people living in society to underplay things or to brush things off sometimes. Like
Yeah.
when you were a kid, it's kind of like, ah, you're okay, pick it up, move along. And sometimes that's well intended and it is true. Like if we stop the world every time a toddler fell down when they're learning to like really like adjust to their bodies, like we would get nothing done, right? But there's an insidiousness to this idea of needing to like push things down or to say, nope, I'm okay, or that wasn't bad enough, or that's,
Mm.
like, but we hear these messages of, don't make waves, don't cause
Mhm.
trouble, or sort of this like sometimes unintentional invalidation that we get from others of like, well, you sure it was that bad? So like your client might go share with a loved one who has all the best intentions. They might say like, "Oh, I had this really like crappy interaction or my boss was really angry." And they might be like, yeah, some people just have a bad day. I don't know why you're taking it so hard. Like, just move along. Just keep a tough upper lip and keep going. And those unintentional or sometimes intentional, but those invalidating interactions that we have can really make it hard to want to talk to people
Mhm.
or to even recognize or name that, yeah, I went through something that wasn't right.
I like how you said that it wasn't right. And again, sometimes it takes time away from the situation, and that could be minutes, that could be hours, that could be years for some people, and to learn to trust ourselves. And I also liked how you said unintentionally. Loved ones usually, hopefully, have our the best intentions, but sometimes things are said or maybe misunderstood, and then that can further and have the person feel invalidated, or like you said, it wasn't big enough, it wasn't that big of a deal, or it only happened once, or it only happened twice this year. That's better than last year. And I agree, acknowledging and recognizing it is the first step. I mean, then what you can do with it are a lot of different things depending upon the situation. Um, but I think it's kind of knowing that the body doesn't only respond to like explosions, but also chronic pressure.
Mm,
So I think the big traumas, the ones that are life-threatening, that make the news, make the headlines,
mhm.
those we all pretty much identify as being traumatic. But the other ones, just because on paper, compared to that, it doesn't seem that bad, doesn't mean that it isn't still incredibly difficult.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. As you're saying that, it makes me think of just more of kind of like the societal kinds of stuff that we pack around trauma. And one of the things that comes to mind is this word trigger.
Mm,
And that, I think it's probably been over a decade, but just I remember aging myself here. But I was past college age when people started talking about like trigger warnings in classrooms. And the the term itself, I think, has become sort of like it in itself can be damaging or could lead people to dismiss or like it's got a whole bunch of baggage with it now. And I'm curious, like I always join with clients when they use whatever language they use because that's their experience. And so I will have clients come in and they'll say, like, oh, yeah, I was triggered in that event. And so I might use that language and then gently offer a different type of language. I'm curious, like, um, what might you say to a client who comes in with some of this, like, language that may not be serving them in the best kind of way?
right. That's a really good question and a really good point. And what it made me think of was I accidentally landed on Bravo, and there were some very rich kids talking about they were so triggered by this and triggered by that. And it really got me thinking that that's really watering down the meaning of the word. I was triggered. Well, you may have been upset by that, or that was upsetting, which is still valid.
Mm.
But I am cautious to kind of use that kind of terminology when something's upsetting but not a trauma trigger. Do you have recommendations for words that
Yeah,
you think are more
yeah.
appropriate?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I tend to encourage people to think about like activating event.
Mhm.
That this is something that sort of activated feelings inside of you or activated a response in you that you found distressing or upsetting. And yeah, just like the fact that like trigger can get thrown around in lots of ways, but also can have really negative implications for people. Because what do we think of when we think of trigger? We think of like guns, and there is gun violence, and that can people can experience like big T kinds of trauma with that
Sure.
and we don't want to invalidate or minimize exactly like you're saying. Um, I'm curious as we start to wrap up, there's so much more we could talk about with trauma, and that we're just like skating on the surface here to have like an introductory conversation for people to start to consider what might be some of the little T's that they're
Yeah.
experiencing like trauma wise in their lives that either they might not recognize and validate for themselves or feel like invalidated from
Mhm.
others around. I'm curious, what would be a key takeaway that you would want people to like carry with them after this conversation?
One thing that really stands out is remembering that trauma consists on a continuum,
Mm,
spectrum, and not only maybe a capital T and a little t, but maybe different variations, different fonts, however you want to use it in between. And that not everything has to be a capital T to be disruptive in one's life with one's well-being and to really be mindful and respectful of others. Um, and also not pushing people to talk about things. And I'm really interested in this may be a wrap up or it might be something you want to add to. What would you say to people about them having to talk about something that's traumatic?
mm, yeah, yeah. We could talk about that for hours. It's such a great point. So, two thoughts come to mind. One is so we're talking about different types of trauma here, in kind of like the little t, big T. And we purposely weren't bringing in the like there's a diagnosis related to trauma, like post-traumatic stress disorder. And you can also have acute stress disorder in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which we use to diagnose people with mental health conditions. Um, one of the key things for that, and why I bring this up is one of the diagnostic criteria, which is jargon, y'all. It's just one of the things that you might have if you have this like a PTSD diagnosis is avoidance. You might want to avoid talking about things that might be healthy to avoid. I say that as I go to the second thought.
Mm.
You don't have to talk about anything that you don't want to talk about. I'm just gonna put it to y'all straight. You are not beholden to anybody to have to bare your soul or share information that you don't feel comfortable or safe doing. So checking in and validating for yourself when it feels safe to share something, when it feels like it's purposeful for you to share about your trauma, big T, little t, whatever it might be. Um, and to know as you reflect on that, if you're like, no, this is not a space I want to share, I don't feel okay, totally fine. It might, over the long run, serve you to find a space to share where it feels safe, where it's maybe with, somebody who's trained to help you talk through that trauma, because that avoidance might not serve you well in the very long run. So I think that's a fantastic question and point. I will wrap us up
Yeah.
with I want people to take away to trust their experience. Like you know what feels good and healthy and what feels unhealthy and feels like bad to you.
Mhm.
Trust yourself. Don't rely on others or don't allow others and even if it's meant really kindly coming from them, don't allow that to tell you that you're not valid in however it is you feel about a situation. Your thoughts are valid, your feelings are valid, your emotions, like all of that is important for you to recognize because just like you were saying, Stacey, earlier with that client, like they might then want to be aware, oh, I might not want to be in a meeting with this person one on one, like
Mhm.
by myself. Like I might want to do this in ways that helps me feel safer. And paying attention to those kinds of things that helps you take care of yourself overall. So
Love that.
I really appreciate this topic. And we just want to, as we sign off, encourage you all to send us more questions. You can message us on YouTube or LinkedIn. And I just really appreciate the thoughtful conversation.
Thank you.